In the winter, those paper routes were really hard because when it would snow, in a wet snow, you'd get out before the snow plows and you couldn't ride your bike. So you just have to put the bag on your shoulders and carry it.
Push the bike.
And push the bike, or your mom and dad couldn't even take you in the car because the snow was too deep. I was walking on the highway going out south of town. I'd go a couple of blocks and hit a couple of families, then back in. And the snowplow came through. And
Knock you down.
it was, yeah, I heard it coming, and it was throwing this sludge, snow, and it got close to me, and I couldn't run to get out of the way. I just turned my back, and it hit, and it just knocked me flat down. Got my papers all soaked, got me soaked. I was so frozen cold. I remember I was just 12 years old. My nostrils were frozen shut. I was cold and wet and crying. I cried all the way home. And it was about halfway through the route. It was so cold. And you just had to keep going and give people wet papers.
Wet papers. I remember the scoutmaster, I needed a bike. So I went up there, and he found an old frame, and he helped me gather parts and build a bike, and had a little welding on it. But that was a good bike. I got an afternoon route that I took, the Logan paper. And so I had the morning paper and an afternoon paper route. And then all summer you'd do farm work in between times.
One of the things I did for work there was the last year we lived there, I was just turning 16. And I was out doing my papers, and the Funk family were painting their house. And so I stopped. I was near the end. I only had 4 or 5 papers left. I painted with them a little bit. I said, I got to go. And they said, well, if you want to come back, we'll pay you. And so I went home and told my mom that I was going to go help the Funks paint their house. And I did. And while I was painting, his brother came. He said, oh, you paint houses?
Sure do.
We sure do. And so he said, well, I own this rental house next door. I'd like you to paint that. So I painted that. Went down to the paint store, and Brother White, Harold White's dad, he could assess what was going on here, and he got me the supplies I needed and taught me about cleanup and how to preserve the brushes, and while I'm painting that house, the mother of the people who rent that house came by and says, oh, you paint houses? And so I painted her house, but then Brother Funk comes, the one that had hired me. He says, wait a minute, I have another house for you to paint. You're not through just because you finished that one. And so after I got her house painted, I painted another house for him. I've said often that if we still lived in Richmond, if we hadn't moved the 1st of August, I'd be delivering newspapers and painting houses. Then we moved to Springville, and I started my junior year there. Paul was a freshman, and we got into working grocery stores. I worked at the IGA store, and you worked
Well, I didn't get it was probably when I was a sophomore, I got the job down at Allen's. They had a sign-up day, and I wasn't there for sign-up day. If you wanted a job, come down and sign up. But when I got back, I says, well, I'd like to have a job. He says, well, he says, we'll see how things go. And I kept going back, and I kept going back, and I kept going back. And last time I went back, he was down there, and he was putting the groceries, the cans on the shelf. And I came down, I was wearing a white shirt, because I knew they were opening that day. And I was wearing a white shirt, and I came down to see if I could get a job. He says, well, where's your tie? I said, it's home. He said, go get it. So I went home and got a tie, and I had a job.
You worked there for several years.
I worked there all during high school, and then I got back from my mission. I worked there.
Yeah. Same with me at the IGA store. I worked at one in Springville. And then the summer that I graduated from high school, I also worked at one of their stores in Provo. I go back and forth. I worked 20 hours at one store and 20 hours at another store, and worked for a farmer, Alan Gardner, another 20 hours a week. And then I'd fill in. I have pay stubs for 95 hours one week, not including Sunday. Then I worked those three
Was that all?
jobs. You were working at a restaurant then.
Yeah, I was working in a restaurant, and then later
Was
on.
that Park Rocher?
Yeah, it was the head restaurant where your girlfriend worked. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah. Because I would call from the
Melody Inn.
Melody Inn. People in our ward ran it. I would call from when I was leaving the store in Provo, and call Susan or Paul and order myself a hamburger. And by the time I got there, it was ready. And then I would grab it and eat it on the rest of the way to the Springville store where I'd work, the evening shift. And that was kind of a fun memory.